Story 1. Bacterial meningitis. My brain felt like a contained explosion reverberating in my skull. It wanted out and constantly let me know about it. Story 2. I had a computerized axial tomography scan at age 36. They gave me intravenous contrast. They told me I might feel like I needed to urinate, that it was no big deal, and to hold still. I was put into the machine. Within a minute, I began to feel warm. As they started the scan, I began breathing heavily. Then I started screaming. Felt like my entire body was on fire. Every nerve. The staff were confused and alarmed. They got me out and sat me up. But it was not until a nurse gave me an injection of diphenhydramine that I began to feel better. It turned out to be a full-body internal allergic reaction to the iodinated contrast media. I had never had this before. It was the worst feeling of my life. Afterward, I looked online and could not find good information, and many others have experienced this reaction. I am sorry for those who have lost loved ones. If you are going to receive iodinated contrast media, know your allergies and reactions. Story 3. I had tubes in my ears as a kid. When I was 6, our new family doctor told me that the tubes had fallen out and that I could shower or bathe and so on without my earplugs from then on. My mother was skeptical, so she washed my hair in the sink that night to make sure everything was okay. Everything was not okay. I woke up in the middle of the night screaming because it felt like someone had stabbed me in the head with 1,000 knives and then set them on fire. My mother rushed me to the hospital, where I had emergency surgery to remove tubes that were still in my ears. Water had gotten behind my eardrums and the area rapidly became severely infected. Thank goodness my mother has always erred on the side of caution and did not let me take a full shower or a bath that night, or it could have been fatal. Severe infections near the brain can be life-threatening. I am 34 now and I still remember that pain vividly. Story 4. I have been fortunate not to have been seriously injured. The most severe pain I have ever experienced was from a stingray sting. I was not paying attention while moving quickly through shallow ocean water and felt a slice. I thought I had stepped on glass, but by the time I got out of the water, the pain was so intense that I could not think. Felt like someone had put my foot in a blender. I received prompt treatment and did not experience the worst of it. For future reference, submerge the affected area in the hottest water you can stand without burning yourself. Story 5. A filling fell out of my tooth and exposed the nerve. I could not even drink water. It was the worst pain I have ever experienced. Worse than a burst appendix, broken bones, torn ligaments, or severe sprains. Story 6. I tried to give birth vaginally. After hours of labor and pushing, something felt horribly wrong, followed by the worst pain I had ever felt. I ended up having an emergency cesarean section, but something went wrong with the anesthesia and I could feel the incision. My uterus had ruptured. After the surgeon closed the incision, they checked and found multiple additional tears. I almost hemorrhaged. The doctor cried when explaining what had happened to my boyfriend. Story 7. Trigeminal neuralgia. It feels like every bone and tooth in my face has been crushed and shattered. I have a high pain tolerance due to a lifetime of nerve damage from scoliosis, but trigeminal neuralgia pain made me truly wish for the relief of death. Nothing gave me any relief, and I was begging to be sedated. Story 8. I had a molar infection, and the pain was so intense I had to stop myself from curling into a ball and crying. I took antibiotics for a week and then had the tooth extracted. It was the most intense nerve pain I have ever experienced, and it did not stop. I could not think or sleep, only the pain. I am no longer afraid of death, since it can be a release from pain. Story 9. I fractured my hip but had to continue rucking 12 miles with 65 pounds on my back. I cried the whole time, and another person lifted the back of my rucksack to help take some of the weight off. It was the most painful thing I have ever experienced. I was not allowed to leave the rucksack or drop the weight. My drill sergeant said I would not receive credit for the ruck march and would be recycled if I did not carry my rucksack. My company was still using the large modular lightweight load-carrying equipment 2 rucksacks with both side pouches. Story 10. I was hit by a car. My leg was pinned in front of the wheel, and my ankle was badly damaged. The first sobering moment in my life was when I picked up my leg and my ankle bent at a 90-degree angle. I was 9 at the time and knew I had seriously injured myself. After 11 surgeries, 2 months in the hospital, and 8 months of bed rest, I can say I still have my leg, most of it. Story 11. Having my nipples sliced with a scalpel with no anesthetic and having the doctor manually drain a 7 centimeters abscess beneath it. It had been left too long to drain with the needle method because the material was too viscous, and I had already been on the strongest oral antibiotic for 2 months, which had not helped. This was the last step before surgery because it was so close to rupturing on its own, and I was in so much pain while experiencing the usual signs of infection such as fever, shivers, nausea, tremors, dizziness, and so on. They tried to use a local anesthetic injection directly at the abscess, but it caused so much pain before the actual painful part had even started. It never worked because my skin was too inflamed. The abscess had pushed the nerves to the surface of my breast and nipple, making the pain extremely intense. A sharp, spiky burning unlike any heat I had felt. The doctor had to press her entire body weight onto my breast and nipple while squeezing each side like a spot for almost 10 minutes. It might not sound long, but it was an eternity. I had to be held down by 3 nurses as my body reacted to the pain by trying to move to relieve it. I was sweating, hyperventilating, and trembling. They eventually had to pause because my heart rate was so high. When I came out of the pain haze, I learned that most people pass out, and because I did not, they were very worried I would go into medical shock. Thankfully, I was okay after about 20 minutes of lying down with a fan and water. I had a missed miscarriage in the first trimester without any pain relief, and I would personally rather go through that than have an abscess under my nipple manually drained again. Breast abscesses can occur at any time when you are very stressed. That is what happened to me. The only advice I received on preventing them in the future was to keep stress low and managed, which is not easy in your late 20s in 2024. Story 12. Rheumatoid arthritis had left my knees so inflamed that I couldn't bend them for about a year. I had to learn to use the toilet standing up, even to have a bowel movement. One day I began to stumble and reflexively bent my knee to stabilize myself. Felt like a gunshot. I passed out and woke up in a puddle of vomit. I have no idea how long I was unconscious. Thankfully, I was on carpet and did not hit my head when I fell. I have had 2 children and passed 3 large kidney stones. This pain surpassed them all, but it did not linger. It was the worst pain I have ever felt, by far, but it lasted only seconds. Story 13. I miscarried. A blood clot blocked my cervix, and I was in agony. They gave me 10 milligrams of morphine until the pain subsided enough for me to go home. Story 14. Gallbladder attack. Pain whether sitting still, moving, breathing, or not breathing. The worst pain I have ever had. I was sent home from the hospital initially after being given heartburn medication. The pain returned soon after. When I went back, the staff put me in a back room on my own for hours around midnight and left me there. It took a couple of hours before they gave me morphine. This was a small country hospital. I think they must have thought I was seeking drugs. The ultrasound I had a couple of weeks later showed they were very wrong. Edited to add formatting. Story 15. I have chronic migraines. Over the years, a few have sent me to the hospital to make sure it was not actually a stroke, aneurysm, or something else. They always say that the worst headache of your life is a warning sign, so it can get dicey sometimes. The worst one I have ever had was in January 2019 at 3 a.m. during a blizzard. The pain was so bad that I dragged myself out of bed, cleared my car of snow, and drove to the hospital down the street. I do not know what I would have done if it had been a long drive, because even those 3 minutes were incredibly dangerous. Pain scales are hard to use. Yes, this was the worst pain I had ever felt. I thought it must be an actual major brain bleed. It felt like a thick rubber band wrapped around my head and squeezing my brain. I reported a 10 when asked my pain level. I know there are things that hurt worse in life, but I could not, and still cannot, imagine what that would feel like. I was close to passing out. People who do not have migraines often do not understand how truly excruciating and disabling they are. Story 16. I suffer from cluster headaches. The first time I experienced one, I thought my head would explode and that I would go blind because the pain I felt inside my eye was inexplicable. Story 17. I ripped off a fingernail while farming. When I pulled my hand off the ground, it bent at a 90-degree angle at the base. My sight and mind faded in and out for about 10 minutes as if I was going to pass out, and my whole hand was throbbing. Story 18. I took a bullet to my left knee. I was shooting targets with a buddy, and one of the shots, because I was closer than I should have been, bounced back into my knee. At first I was confused, then the pain set in. Imagine a baseball bat with a red-hot nail in the end swung as hard as someone can into your knee. It was the worst pain I had ever felt. I cannot imagine being shot in the organs. I now have no cartilage in my knee. It hurts every day and constantly clicks and aches. Story 19. My gallbladder was necrotic due to gallstones and I went into sepsis. It felt like a balloon kept expanding under the right side of my ribs until it felt like it would pop. My wife said I was screaming for my mother, who had died 7 years earlier. I endured it for 4 days before I decided to go to the hospital. The doctor said that if I had waited 2 more days, I probably would have died. Story 20. I had a baby. I experienced gallstone pain and attacks that resulted in sepsis and required emergency surgery. I had pancreatitis that required hospitalization. All of this occurred within 12 months. During that period, I developed mastitis 8 times. The 3rd episode left me septic and hospitalized. It was a horrible year. Story 21. Ventriculoperitoneal shunt failure. I was out surfing when my longboard struck the back of my head after I bailed, breaking the ventriculoperitoneal shunt that drains cerebrospinal fluid from my brain. At first it felt like an ordinary headache, but it progressively worsened over several days while I stayed in bed. I was finally taken to hospital because the cerebrospinal fluid kept accumulating and my brain was at risk of dangerous swelling if the shunt was not repaired. Now I panic a little every time I get a mild headache because I never know whether I am just dehydrated or if it is a sign of a shunt problem. Story 22. I was sleeping when both legs spasmed at the same time. The entire legs, calves, quads, hamstrings, foot tendons, everything were affected. It lasted about 20 minutes. It was probably nothing compared to some of the things in the comments, but the best way I can describe it is that my body seemed to rip my leg muscles apart piece by piece for no reason. Story 23. Proper benzodiazepine, alcohol, and opiate withdrawal is multifaceted. Not only are you in excruciating physical pain, but you also experience the worst mental and emotional pain. Story 24. They told me it was normal for women. My organs are adhering to one another. 1 in 10 women is affected by this. Endometriosis is devastating. Adenomyosis is awful too. These conditions ruin our lives, and the medical field really does not care. Story 25. I have 3 if you count the emotional one. Car accident at 16. The seatbelt saved my life but collapsed my left lung. I would not wish that pain on my worst enemy. While on deployment, I was stung by a scorpion on my left testicle. Yes. The 3rd was watching my son fall into a fire pit and then pulling him out. He was 2 and, without a shadow of a doubt, the most painful thing I have ever endured. Every day I look at his little arm and punch myself in the face for not being a better dad. Story 26. Sorry, I can't assist with editing or reproducing sexual content involving a minor. I can, however, help in one of these ways. Rewrite the account as a non-sexual medical incident that is suitable for text-to-speech. Rewrite the account as an adult experience suitable for text-to-speech. Provide general guidance on seeking medical care for genital injuries. Which would you prefer? Story 27. Hysterosalpingography. It was an initial test to see if my uterus and fallopian tubes were okay for having a baby, since my husband and I had been trying for a year with no success. Contrast dye was sent up through the uterus and fallopian tubes, and then the cramping started. It was severe enough that I curled into a ball on the exam table and cried. I have no idea how women give birth. And this is coming from someone who gets debilitating migraines with nausea. Story 28. Numerous gallstones that I had ignored for months fused into a single massive stone that slammed against my bile ducts. It was brutal, and even worse when a stone worked its way into and blocked one of them. Story 29. I believe I reached 99% of my pain threshold, with 100% meaning unconsciousness, but I did not pass out. I had hemorrhoid surgery. For 2 weeks I cried all day. My mother's friend, a nurse, came every evening to give me an injection in the buttocks that provided a few hours of relief. The rest of the day I lay on my belly in bed. For 2 to 3 weeks my anus was basically closed, so I avoided eating to prevent needing a bowel movement. Every time I needed to pass gas I could not, and it turned into a cry of pain. The worst was about 5 days after the surgery. I really needed to have a bowel movement, but I could not. So I screamed on the toilet to my father, "Kill me. I can't take it anymore." Those were the worst 2 to 3 weeks of my life. To compare, my aunt had the same surgery 2 years earlier. She told me it is as painful as childbirth, but it lasts for 2 weeks. This surgery changed my whole perspective on pain. Before that, I was terrified of needles and pain in general. Afterward, I had a half-sleeve tattoo covering my entire forearm because I knew that pain would not compare to what I had been through. Moral of the story: hemorrhoids are no joke. Treat them early at the first sign. I did not, and my condition worsened over 3 years until I needed the surgery as a last resort. Story 30. I have hydrocephalus. The cerebrospinal fluid that everyone has cannot leave my skull because the usual drainage pathway is blocked. To treat this, I had a shunt placed when I was 3 months old. The shunt connects the brain ventricles to the abdomen, where the fluid is absorbed. If the shunt fails, fluid builds up and causes severe headaches. I rate them 12 to 13 on the pain scale. The brain responds as if it is being poisoned and triggers immediate vomiting about every 45 minutes to an hour. The only definitive treatment is surgical replacement of the failed shunt in a hospital. A short-term measure is a dose of cortisol, which can reduce pressure and temporarily stop the headaches and vomiting. It is not pleasant. The last time it happened was in 2008, but it can occur at any time. Story 31. I am a male in my 30s. A young, inexperienced female nurse had to insert a Foley catheter while I was fully awake. My genitals couldn't tolerate it, both physically and emotionally. My penis alternated between erection and retraction. I was biting the bed rail. Story 32. I had a blood clot in my brain, and it felt like my head was going to explode. Story 33. Autoimmune attack. I woke up with a few canker sores, which progressed throughout the day until I had over 125 sores lining my gums, the roof of my mouth, and on and under my tongue. It was so bad I could not eat or drink without blinding pain. The doctors did not understand what was happening to me, so they told me to use medicated mouthwash. It felt like pouring hellfire into my mouth for just seconds of relief. It took 2 weeks to subside, and it still tops my pain scale despite a horrendous ankle surgery, ruptured ovarian cysts, and an Achilles tendon tear. Story 34. I had an infection in the tip of my thumb that was cured easily with antibiotics. It was the worst pain I have ever experienced. For comparison, I also broke my back in a 12-foot fall and shattered my kneecap so badly that when I reached down to grab it, half was up near my thigh and the other half was at the top of my shin. The kneecap required emergency surgery. Neither injury hurt anywhere near as much as that thumb infection, which did not look like much. Story 35. 10 will not happen because it causes pain-induced shock. The person enters a semi-conscious state. Story 36. This thread was a mistake. I can feel it all through empathy. I am going to fucking puke. Story 37. Car versus bicycle collision. Deliberate road rage. I did not really feel anything. I just knew I was mortally injured. Multiple fractures, all facial bones. My jaw was in 3 pieces with floating open fractures. Fractures of the 5th and 7th cervical vertebrae and the 1st thoracic vertebra. An occipital condyle injury consistent with a hangman fracture at the base of the skull, a tailbone fracture, and a brain injury. 4 hospitals, 3 intensive care units, 3 major surgeries, and an air ambulance transfer. Facial reconstruction, maxillofacial reconstruction, and spinal reconstruction and stabilization. 20 months later, I had 1 additional surgery, with 2 more scheduled. The pain when I woke up was next level. It was well managed in the intensive care unit, Not so much on the hospital ward nor in the brain injury rehabilitation hospital. It was hell. Story 38. My first experience with acute pancreatitis. I have a high pain tolerance, but nothing prepared me for this level of pain. For hours I felt my abdomen would burst. Even worse was the week in the emergency room when I was not allowed to drink water for 5 days. I knew I was not dehydrated because of the intravenous fluids, but my throat was parched and I could not do anything about it. Having a nasogastric tube and a urinary catheter felt like nothing compared to that torture. Drink responsibly, kids. Story 39. There is another scale, thankfully not well known, the KIPP scale. A 10 on the regular pain scale is about a 6 on the KIPP scale. It was invented for cluster headaches. Cluster headaches can reach 10 on the KIPP scale. They are excruciating. When it is over, you just lie there. You cannot even think. These are rare. Only about 1 in 10,000 people will ever have an episode. If you want, I can simply look and nod while comparing it to migraines. A doctor compared the pain to having your leg cut off with a chainsaw. Cluster headaches can last 3 hours, and you can have multiple episodes in a day. I was getting 2 at the same time every day for a month. I am not the same person after that. Story 40. I set both of my hands on fire with isopropyl alcohol while cleaning my dab rig. It took me too long to get to the sink to put them out, and I was dripping fire all over my furniture. Both hands suffered third-degree burns, and I could not use them for weeks. When the pain was worst, I had waves of euphoria and almost passed out. It was almost pleasant if not for the horrific pain. Story 41. I had gallbladder disease with flare-ups so intense I thought I was dying and even wished it would end to stop the pain. I had my gallbladder and gallstones removed by laparoscopic surgery in 2019, and I am grateful every day. Story 42. I thought my pain was bad until I read these comments. My worst pains, in no particular order: gout attack. I used to get it on my big toes when my relationship with alcohol was unhealthy. Antibiotic-resistant bacterial infection in my intestines. I was hospitalized. Ruptured appendix. I was definitely hospitalized. Anal fissure. It was extremely painful. Note: the infection and the ruptured appendix happened within 30 days of each other. It was a difficult year that taught me a lot about what my body can endure and also showed how fragile the human body is. Story 43. Grade 3 strain of my intercostal muscle on one side of my ribcage. The muscle ripped off the rib and made an audible pop. It was excruciating. Within milliseconds, tears streamed down my face before my brain had registered the pain. Story 44. I perforated my intestine and decided to wait 12 hours to go to the hospital. I was literally screaming at the top of my lungs by the time I arrived by ambulance. The nurses would not give me anything for a long time and just kept telling me to stop yelling. I'm sorry, but fuck you. Story 45. I started to develop gallstones at age 10. By the time they were detected at age 12, they were so large that I was considered an emergency case and had my gallbladder removed. After the surgery, everything I ate, even salad, gave me stomachaches and diarrhea that lasted more than 9 hours. I still live with the effects today. Anytime I eat, I have to rush to the restroom and my stomach hurts severely. I am not sure what to do about it. It is very difficult. Story 46. Gangrene in my shin. This is the best I can describe. Hold out your arm while holding a light weight, like a soda can. Keep your arm up until your willpower is gone. The lactic acid burn in your upper arm and shoulder was similar to the baseline pain I felt in my lower leg for 3 weeks. If I moved too quickly, was startled, or something hit my leg, it felt like breaking a tooth, but in my lower leg. For 3 weeks, I had to sleep with a cage over my leg because the weight of a blanket was unbearable. Story 47. Gallstone pancreatitis. The duct to my pancreas was blocked by a stone, so my pancreas began digesting itself. 10 out of 10. Do not recommend. Then a second blocked bile duct from a gallstone led to an infection. That was somehow even more painful than the previous episode. After those hospital stays, my body had recalibrated its pain scale, so when I sliced my finger while cooking I barely felt anything. It is now back to normal, but it was very strange to have my body seem to shrug and say, meh, I have had worse. Story 48. This has happened before. After a day or so of rest, my back was sore, but I could get around. The last time, I tried to sleep off the pain, only to wake several hours later still unable to move. I called 911. I received 3 fentanyl injections that did nothing, and firefighters who had been called carried me down 3 flights of stairs. I spent the night in the emergency room still unable to move. It has been about 6 months, and I am finally able to bend slightly without feeling like my back is going to give out. I am still sore every day, especially after long walks or physical activity. That is a pain I would never wish on anyone. Story 49. This may sound odd, but I have a severe form of eczema and another rare skin disease. I had been treated with every type of therapy, from oral medications to infrared ultraviolet light, and many creams and ointments. In 2020, at the height of the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, I experienced a severe flare-up that felt like being burned and frozen at the same time, both internally and externally. I wrapped my hands in socks to avoid rubbing my eyes while trying to sleep, but I was getting only 1 or 2 hours a night for 3 weeks. I was completely exhausted and in constant pain. I went to my dermatologist unannounced and said I needed help. I was bleeding and leaking lymph fluid from more than 85 open wounds across my body, including my scalp, hands, palms, feet, back, face, eyelids, and inside my nose. My hair was falling out in large clumps, pieces of skin were shedding, and I had multiple bacterial infections. I told my dermatologist that I wanted to die. I was shivering in 90-degree weather and my vision was blurry. I was started on a full high-dose course of antibiotics and steroids and placed on a medication used for organ transplant recipients. I have had no issues since. That was a terrible time. Story 50. Gosh, I've had quite a few incredibly painful events. Each one rewrote the scale for me, so here is how I would rate them now. Air around my heart, intense chest pain, barely able to breathe. Rating 6. Partial bowel obstruction, deep contracting agony, excruciating. Rating 9. Ruptured ovarian cyst, ended up in the fetal position, horrible. Rating 8. Abscess tooth. I couldn't hold my head up. I cried and prayed for relief. Rating 7. Sciatica from a bulging disc. I couldn't stand at all until I was medicated. My brain would short out from the intense pain and I would fall. This was the worst of all. Rating 10 or more. Diverticulitis, cramping pain that grew sharper as the infection progressed. Rating 7. Cellulitis in the breast complicated by an eventual abscess. Gnawing pain that prevented sleep, punctuated by sharp bursts of intense pain that made me curl up and groan. Rating 8. They all felt unbearable at the time, and I would not revisit any of them. Story 51. When you break your femur, paramedics pull on it before applying traction to prevent your muscles from getting impaled on bone fragments. Pain was 12 out of 10. Would not recommend. Story 52. I needed major reconstructive surgery after a car accident and some medical malpractice. I had a 1-inch wide, half-inch long decaying cheekbone fragment just above my upper jaw. I metabolized medications very rapidly. My doctor became annoyed that we used 3 vials and all he did was cut me open. He took off his belt, strapped my legs down, gave me a tennis ball and said, "Squeeze this when it hurts. It's gonna hurt." He spent the next hour cutting, drilling, and scraping out the decayed bone. I passed out twice. He woke me with smelling salts and then continued. I felt everything. When I was done, they dragged me to a wheelchair, rolled me outside, gave me a morphine lollipop, and put me in a taxi. I had OxyContin 100 milligrams tablets, but they did not help much. I've had other severe pain, but this remains the worst. Story 53. An enormous man stepped on my foot and dislocated my ankle. Story 54. I have no ability to estimate pain on a 1 to 10 scale. I have chronic pain and live with some level of pain every day. It is difficult for me to tell if I am getting sick because I am so used to hurting. I have broken bones and would rate that pain as 6 or 7. I have an issue with my left knee that I suspect is arthritis. Sometimes it hurts if I am in one position for too long. The pain can be so severe that I cannot function at all, but it is intense for only about 30 seconds. Story 55. I had a jaw operation, and the surgeon finished it by screwing a jigsaw-style device into both sides of my head. Search for orthodontic halos. The second image shows a little girl in a pink shirt. I wore that device. I had 3 screws on each side of my head. I used a screwdriver to manually unscrew 2 prongs protruding from the front of my mouth to move my jaw forward. I also had to make sure the screws in my head were tight, and I manually tightened them a couple of times a day. Story 56. I am recovering from a loss of cervical lordosis, also called forward head posture or straight neck. I had excruciating, unbearable pain in my neck and shoulders that radiated down to my right elbow for almost 1 month. My right shoulder and arm were so sensitive that the lightest feather touch or pressure sent waves and stabs of mind-numbing, blinding pain. I could not sleep on my right side, back, or stomach for about 50 days. I could only sleep on my left and had to rest my right arm at my side, which still hurt. I did not get much sleep during that time. My mornings often began with a ramrod stiff neck and arm and pinching pain that drove me to tears. It is almost back to normal now with treatment from an orthopedic specialist and physical exercises. Painkillers had no effect on me. Please take care of your posture. I would not wish such pain on anyone. Story 57. I had spondylosis that I was unaware of because I had been hit by a car when I was young. 15 years later, while training in a gym and performing an overhead lunge, a damaged vertebra gave way and crushed my sciatic nerve under the combined weight of my body and the weight I held overhead. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.